how does a city of, 500,000 people, a metropolis that is literally just swimming in millions of pounds of gold and diamonds, how does it just vanish?
It's hard to even wrap your head around.
Right. I mean, imagine a place so advanced, so densely populated and creatively vibrant that the early foreign travelers actually compared it to Rome itself.
Yeah, the scale was just massive.
Exactly. Now imagine that same sprawling, invincible capital turning into a literal tiger sanctuary in just 24 months.
It is a complete and utter erasure. I mean, going from the absolute pinnacle of global wealth to this terrifying ghost town, leaving only the scorched bedrock behind to prove it ever existed at all.
It sounds like dark fantasy.
Yeah.
Like something out of a post-apocalyptic novel.
Okay.
But this is recorded history, so welcome to the deep dive. Today we are unpacking the secrets of Hampi, the ruined capital of the great Vijayanagara Empire in southern India.
It's such a fascinating sight.
It really is. And for you listening, we are pulling from some incredibly detailed historical and archaeological texts today. Specifically, we're heavily referencing the work of A.H. Longhurst, who he documented the Hampi ruins for the Archaeological Survey of India.
His accounts are incredibly granular, which is great for us.
Totally. So our mission today is to figure out the mechanics of this mystery. Like, how did this specific empire rise from a totally fractured political landscape to dominate the entire southern peninsula?
And how they engineered those mind-boggling water systems in what is basically a desert of solid rock.
Yes. Plus, how they managed to blend vastly diverse, even conflicting faiths. And ultimately, what on earth caused their sudden catastrophic end?
Right. We are digging into the anatomy of what they actually called the City of Victory. And I think it's important to note, this isn't just about reading off dry architectural specs or dates.
Definitely not.
We are decoding a landscape where mythology, raw military power, and frankly, unimaginable wealth were physically carved into stone. But to really understand Hampi, you have to understand that the environment itself dictated the culture.
I want to start exactly there, with the environment, because if we're going to talk about who built this empire, we have to look at the incredibly bizarre place they chose to build it.
It is not your typical capital city location.
Not at all. When you look at photographs of Hampi, the terrain looks absolutely alien. Imagine standing in the middle of a giant's playground.
That's a good way to put it.
As far as the eye can see, you have these cyclopean masses of granite boulders just piled up in these precarious, impossible ways. It looks completely chaotic.
And that physical geography is arguably the single most defining factor of Vijayanagara's existence. You have this region jotted with these barren, rocky hills.
Right.
And cutting right through this rugged terrain to the north is the Tungabhadra River. And it just hurries along this boulder-strewn channel, rushing down heavy rapids and squeezing through very narrow, treacherous gorges.
It sounds intensely dramatic.
It is. The landscape is incredibly harsh.
And Longhurst spends a lot of time describing the weathering of these hills. He talks about the granite being colored in every shade from gray to brown, completely devoid of vegetation.
Just stark, naked stone baking in the sun.
Yeah, but he also uses phrases like the slow processes of denudation, which sounds a bit academic. What exactly is happening to this rock to make it look so bizarre?
Well, let's break that down. So denudation essentially means millions of years of wind, rain, and elemental forces slowly stripping away the softer earth and topsoil.
Okay, so just wearing it down.
Exactly.
Oh.
And what you are left with are these massive, hardened granite cores exposed to the air. On top of that, you have to factor in the extreme climate of the Deccan Plateau.
Right, the heat.
Right. The region experiences intense, burning hot days followed by very chilly nights. And over millennia, that constant, aggressive cycle of thermal expansion and contraction causes the solid rock to basically seam and split in every conceivable direction.
Wow, so the weather is just breaking the mountains apart.
Basically. Add in the seismic activity, earthquakes from remote ages, and enormous boulders are literally torn from the flanks of these hills. They pile up in the most fantastic, chaotic confusion.
I've seen pictures where some of these builders are perfectly, delicately poised on one another at these hazardous angles.
Yeah, completely defying gravity.
Oh.
While others form these completely impassable barriers, it almost looks like the intentional work of giant hands, rather than nature, simply because of the immense scale.
That visual is stunning. But here is where the geology intersects with something much deeper. Because this specific, chaotic, boulder-strewn landscape isn't just geologically interesting. It is deeply sacred.
Extremely sacred.
This exact physical location is identified in ancient texts as Kishkinda,
Right, the legendary monkey kingdom from the Ramayana.
which is just wild to think about.
It really is. This is where the physical geography perfectly overlays with one of the most important ancient epics in Indian culture.
So for anyone who might not be intimately familiar with the Ramayana, it follows the hero Rama, who is an avatar of the god Vishnu, on this massive journey to rescue his wife, Sita.
Right, she was abducted by Ravana.
Exactly, the 10-headed demon king of Lanka. And according to local tradition, which is supported by historical texts, the events involving Rama's alliance with the Monkey Kingdom happened right here among these specific granite hills in Hampi.
And the local legends map directly onto the topography you can walk through today. It's not just a general area.
They point to specific rocks, right?
Exactly. For instance, there's a very specific cave pointed out by locals where the Monkey King Sugriva is said to have hidden Sita's jewels.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the story dictates that as Sita was being carried through the air by Ravana in his flying chariot, she stealthily dropped some of her garments and jewels as a trail.
Smart.
Very. And Sugriva found them, kept them safe in this cave, and later presented them to Rama as proof that she had been taken south.
There is also that major geographical feature, Matanga Parvatam, the hill of the sage Matanga. The epic says Sugriva fled to this exact hill to hide from his immensely powerful brother, Vali, because Vali was under this specific curse that meant his head would literally burst if he ever set foot on that one particular hill.
So Sugriva just used it as a designated safe zone.
Basically. And visitors to Hampi today will immediately notice the local monkey populations, and even they are woven into the living mythology.
Oh, yeah. You have the black-faced gray langurs and the smaller red-faced macaques scampering all over these ancient ruins.
And the locals have a belief about them, right?
Yes. The local belief, held for centuries, is that these two species are the direct living descendants of the epic monkey heroes Vali and Sugriva,
That is so cool.
and those tumbled, gravity-defying masses of boulders we just talked about. The local mythology explains them not as, thermal expansion or denudation, but as the leftover building material collected by Hanuman's monkey army.
When they were constructing the Great Stone Causeway to Lanka to rescue Sita.
Exactly. Hanuman, the monkey chief, known for his devotion and strength, he remains the most universally popular deity across this entire district.
So just imagine living in a city where your literal backyard is the setting of your culture's greatest epic. Everywhere you look, you see physical evidence of your deepest mythologies.
It would be incredibly powerful psychologically.
But setting the spiritual significance aside for a moment, I have to look at the logistics, because with such impassable, chaotic terrain, why on earth would any sane engineer or king choose this exact spot to build a massive, sprawling imperial capital?
It does seem crazy at first glance.
Building a metropolis in a boulder field just seems like an absolute nightmare.
It seems counterintuitive until you look at it through the lens of medieval warfare. The choice was driven by a blend of intense pragmatism and sheer necessity.
Okay, how so?
Well, this rugged terrain, paired with the rushing rapids of the Tungabhadra River, provided an unparalleled natural fortress. If you were trying to construct a capital city that can withstand prolonged sieges and massive invasions, having these impassable barriers of giant boulders already in place is a massive strategic advantage.
Oh, I see. So you don't have to build outer defensive walls if nature has already provided a 100-foot granite barrier.
Precisely. And secondly, the building material was literally lying on the ground, waiting to be used.
Right, the boulders themselves.
They had an unlimited, inexhaustible supply of splendid granite right on site. They could quarry huge blocks of stone of vast dimensions, stones so heavy that transporting them from a distant quarry would have been logistically impossible in the 14th century.
So they're essentially carving the city out of its own foundations. They didn't have to haul stone for 50 miles. They just shaped the hills they were standing on.
The landscape completely dictated the urban planning. The lowest ground, the valleys between the rocky outcrops, was covered with lush fields of sugarcane and rice, heavily watered by intricate channels drawn from the river.
And the higher ground?
The steep sides of the hills and the higher elevations became the fortified enclosing walls, the watchtowers, and the grand streets of the city.
Okay, so a natural fortress with a built-in infinite supply closet of granite. That makes perfect sense. And this naturally brings us to the political urgency that forced them to build this fortress in the first place.
Right, they weren't just building for fun.
Exactly. Because they weren't building a city deep in this rocky terrain just for the aesthetics. They were building a desperate bulwark.
The political climate of southern India in the 14th century was incredibly volatile. To understand the genesis of Vijayanagara, we have to look at the year 1310 as the major historical catalyst.
1310. What happened then?
This was the moment when the armies from the northern Delhi Sultanate began pushing south, seriously threatening the existence of all the established Hindu kingdoms in the Deccan Plateau.
No, I want to make a quick point of clarification here for anyone reading along with Longhurst or similar historical texts from the 19th and early 20th centuries. Those sources repeatedly use the terms Mohammedan or Muslim forces.
Yes, that's common in older texts.
Right. To translate that for a modern historical context, they're referring to the various Islamic armies and the expanding sultanates from the north. The texts recount how these forces swept into the Deccan with immense military power.
And the sources specifically highlight a famous general named Malik Kafur. He led an immense force southward. He captured the city of Warangal, then took and brutally sacked Advar Samudra.
It was a very rapid conquest.
Very rapid.
Yeah.
Just 2 years later, his armies marched south again, and the stronghold of Devagiri fell. The dominant local Hindu dynasties of that era, specifically the Hoysalas and the Yadavas, were practically extinguished overnight.
Which leaves a huge void.
Exactly. This sudden violent collapse created a massive power vacuum across southern India. The region plunged into a state of total anarchy.
So who is fighting who at this point?
You had the newly installed governors from the northern sultanates, surviving representatives of the old broken royal families, and ambitious local chieftains, all suddenly locked in this chaotic struggle for supremacy and, really, survival.
And out of that intense chaos, the Vijayanagara Empire is born. The traditional founding date is 1336. But how exactly does that happen? Like, how do you go from total regional anarchy to founding a unified empire?
Epigraphical evidence, so. The inscriptions carved into stone and copper plates points to the empire being founded by two Hindu princes named Hakka and Bukka.
The Sangama dynasty.
Yes. They were originally subordinates, local leaders under the recently crushed Hoysala dynasty. With the old power structures destroyed, they realized that the only way to survive the continuous northern incursions was to unify the fractured southern territories into a single, highly militarized state.
But they couldn't just declare themselves kings of a new empire and expect everyone to fall in line, right? Especially in a state of total anarchy. They needed some sort of legitimacy.
And they found that legitimacy through spiritual backing. They founded the city and the empire with the direct guidance and immense political assistance of a prominent Brahmin sage named Madhava.
He's more famously known in history as Vijayanagara, right?
Correct. By aligning themselves with a deeply respected spiritual leader, Hakka and Bukka weren't just seen as warlords grabbing land, they were ordained protectors of the Dharma.
That's a huge distinction.
Massive. Vijayanagara actually became the first minister of the new state, blending religious authority directly with military strategy.
It is a recurring theme in history. The most resilient empires almost always start with a potent combination of military necessity and divine justification. And it totally worked here.
It certainly did.
This first dynasty, the Sangama dynasty, held the throne for over a century. They built Vijayanagara, which literally translates to the city of victory, specifically to serve as an impenetrable fortress against those northern invasions.
They leveraged that granite landscape we discussed, rallied the fractured chieftains under the banner of divine protection, and slowly consolidated power, pushing back the borders and securing the southern peninsula.
That perfectly covers the desperate foundation. But let's fast forward through the timeline a bit, past a couple of dynastic shifts, to arrive at the absolute golden era.
Oh, this is the best part.
If we are talking about Hampi at its peak, we have to talk about Krishnadeva. He ruled from 1509 to 1530, and reading the primary sources detailing his life, well, the man sounds like a literal superhero.
He is undeniably the most conspicuous, larger-than-life figure on the stage of Vijayanagara history.
Absolutely.
Under his leadership, the empire didn't just survive, it reached the absolute zenith of its military and economic power. And what makes his reign so fascinating is that we don't just have to rely on local court poets praising their king.
Right, because they would naturally be biased.
Exactly. We have incredibly detailed chronicles from foreign visitors who were observing him objectively.
Like Domingos Pace.
Yes, exactly.
He was a Portuguese traveler and horse trader who visited the capital around 1520. He provides these amazingly graphic, granular details about the king's daily life.
His accounts are gold for historians.
Pace writes that Krishnadeva was like an elite athlete. He didn't just sit on a throne, he kept himself in peak physical condition by doing rigorous bodily exercise every single day.
Before the sun even came up.
Right. He would rise before dawn and practice intense swordplay or ride his horses hard across the plains. Pays describes him as having a noble, commanding presence, but also possessing really attractive manners.
He was very well-rounded.
Yeah, he was a major patron of literature, a poet in his own right, an able general, brave, statesmanlike, and yet noted for being surprisingly gentle and generous with his subjects.
It's quite the resume.
Now, I always try to approach these historical accounts with a bit of skepticism.
Of course.
History absolutely loves to exaggerate its heroes. We see this all the time, the conquering king who is somehow also a master poet, a brilliant philosopher, and wakes up at 4 a.m. to lift weights. It sounds like excellent 16th century PR.
It does sound like a bit much.
So does the archaeological record actually back up these sweeping, grandiose claims about Krishnadevaraya's reign?
It is entirely fair to question the hagiography. Kings always want to be remembered as gods. But in this specific case, the physical evidence left behind strongly corroborates the accounts of his extraordinary capability.
Really? Like what?
We are looking at the monumental infrastructure he commissioned. He fundamentally overhauled the administration of the empire, systematically dividing it into manageable provinces under the control of trusted local governors, which stabilized the economy.
Okay, so good administrative skills.
But more importantly, for our deep dive into Hampi itself, he was an obsessive, visionary builder. He did more than any of his predecessors to beautify and fortify the capital.
He built a lot of the major stuff we see today, right?
Yes. He built enormous temple complexes, massive embankments, and highly complex irrigation channels. His infrastructure projects were so vast and required such immense capital and labor that they physically altered the landscape, allowing the city to support a massive booming population in a region that really should not have been able to sustain it.
Which perfectly sets up the next crucial piece of the puzzle. Because you can have all the granite walls, all the divine legitimacy, and the greatest king in the world. But if you are building a massive population center in a rocky, heat-scorched climate, you need water.
You need a lot of water.
And the engineering they utilize to solve this problem is simply astonishing.
The transition from the political history of the empire to its sheer engineering prowess is where Hampi truly shines as an advanced civilization.
Yeah, let's get into the engineering.
To support the king's grand visions and to feed hundreds of thousands of people, they had to master their harsh environment completely. Every single early foreign traveler who visited Vijayanagara, whether they are Portuguese, Italian, or Persian, was struck with absolute astonishment at the wonderful, intricate irrigation systems that permeated the city.
Let's talk about the mechanics of that, because Longhurst describes one specific channel called the Turutu Channel.
Which means swift.
Right. And this channel was actually initiated by Krishnadevaraya's predecessor, Bukka II, but it represents the kind of engineering the empire relied on later. This channel was cut directly through solid granite.
It's an incredible feat.
And incredibly, it is still running today. It still waters the agricultural lands around the modern ruins. But, how do you carve a massive water channel through solid granite using 14th century hand tools? They didn't have dynamite or modern diamond-tipped drills?
The labor and ingenuity required are just staggering. They relied on ancient, highly effective stone-cutting techniques. One common method was fire setting.
Fire setting?
Yeah, they would build massive fires directly on the surface of the granite to heat the rock to extreme temperatures. Then they would suddenly douse the blazing hot stone with cold water.
Oh, to cause a thermal shock.
Exactly. The rapid thermal shock would cause the top layers of the granite to fracture and flake off.
That is brilliant, but it sounds so tedious.
It was. And for deeper cuts, they would chisel small lines of holes into the rock, drive incredibly dry wooden wedges tightly into those holes, and then soak the wood with water.
Wait, soak the wood?
Yeah. As the wood absorbed the water and expanded, the immense outward pressure would eventually crack the solid stone along the desired line.
Wow.
Doing this over miles of terrain day after day requires an unimaginable workforce and meticulous engineering oversight.
And it wasn't just local ingenuity driving this infrastructure boom either. This is where we see just how cosmopolitan and globally connected this empire was.
Right. They were a major player on the global stage.
Krishnadevaraya didn't just rely on traditional methods. He actively sought out foreign talent for his most ambitious water project. The chronicler Fernão Nunes records a really fascinating exchange.
Yes, about the reservoir.
The king explicitly requested the Portuguese governor of Goa to send him Portuguese stonemasons and engineers to superintend the building of a massive, unprecedented water reservoir near modern-day Hospit.
And the Portuguese obliged. They sent an engineer named Joan de la Ponte. Nunes describes him simply as a great worker in stone.
I love that.
De la Ponte collaborated with local builders to construct an enormous tank and dam system designed to capture the floodwaters and supply a consistent, massive volume of water to the new sections of the city and the surrounding agricultural lands.
I just love that detail so much. It's exactly like a 16th century Silicon Valley.
That is a great comparison.
The empire encounters a complex local infrastructure scaling problem, so what do? They leverage their international trade connections to recruit specialized global talent, a Portuguese engineer to collaborate, innovate, and solve it.
That analogy fits perfectly. And solving the bulk water supply was only half the battle.
Right, they had to distribute it.
The internal distribution system within the royal citadel itself was incredibly sophisticated. They didn't just rely on people carrying water from a central reservoir. They engineered a complex network of elevated stone aqueducts.
So actual plumbing.
Yes. Water was brought in at a considerable elevation and carried through intricately carved stone channels. These aqueducts were often separated by deep roadways, running parallel to the massive enclosure walls, utilizing gravity to maintain water pressure over long distances.
And the archaeological sources mention a whole plumbing network, right? Like they found branch pipes.
Yes, some carved from stone, others made of earthenware, connecting the main elevated channels to smaller local networks. They were actively supplying little tanks, private baths, and stone troughs connected directly to the buildings within the citadel.
But here's the crucial nuance that Longhurst points out, and I think this is so interesting. No attempt was ever made to supply the general population or the entire sprawling city with running water from this specific elevated stone system.
Right, it was very exclusive.
The general populace relied on the river, the larger agricultural channels like the Turutu, and deep wells. The highly engineered, gravity-fed water from these elevated stone aqueducts was destined almost exclusively for the state apartments and the royal enclosure.
As a status symbol.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Longhurst notes that the sheer volume of water required to fill all the tanks and baths belonging to the state apartments would be large, but not so large that they couldn't have just used wells and manual labor.
Especially back then.
Right. In this era, manual labor was incredibly cheap and abundant. If they just needed water for drinking and basic bathing, a small army of servants carrying clay pots would have been infinitely cheaper and easier than carving miles of elevated stone aqueducts.
Oh, without a doubt.
So why go through the immense trouble and expense to build this plumbing network?
Because it wasn't just about utility. It was an extravagant display of power. It was extreme luxury, weaponized as political propaganda.
Weaponized plumbing.
Exactly. They were using this intricate, highly engineered system to irrigate private orchards, massive rose gardens, and opulent royal baths right in the middle of a baking barren rock fortress.
Wow.
It was a demonstration of absolute godlike mastery over a harsh, unyielding environment.
By having gravity-fed running water pouring into a private rose garden in a boulder field, the king is essentially communicating like, my power is so absolute, my resource is so infinite that I can command the river to flow uphill and make roses bloom on solid granite.
Precisely. It is a flex of unparalleled magnitude.
I have running water in my private palace while living on a sun-baked rock.
Right. It communicated to any visiting dignitary or rival chieftain that the Vijayanagara king was operating on a completely different plane of existence.
And following those elevated water channels leads us directly into the heart of where that power was exercised, the royal center. Specifically, the buildings utilized by the king and his inner court for public displays of dominance.
So now we enter the citadel. And the most striking, imposing ruin remaining in this area is a structure the locals now call the Dasara Dipa, or the Mahanavami Dipa,
The great throne platform.
built by Krishnadeva Raya in 1513. And the timing is important. He built it immediately following his triumphant, grueling military campaign against the king of Orissa.
So it's a monument to his victory.
Exactly. The Portuguese traveler Domingos Paes appropriately referred to it as the House of Victory. Its primary function was to serve as the royal stage for the spectacular 9-day Navaratri, or Dasara festival.
I really want you, the listener, to visualize this structure because calling it a platform feels like a massive understatement.
It does not do it justice.
Imagine standing at the base of this thing. It is a massive, multi-tiered, square, terraced structure, rising almost 40 feet into the air. It was originally faced entirely with large, precisely carved granite blocks. Later on, parts of it were refaced with a dark green chlorite stone.
And the use of chlorite stone is significant. Unlike the incredibly hard, brittle local granite, chlorite is a much softer, more yielding stone.
So it's easier to carve.
Much easier. It allows sculptors to achieve a level of fine, intricate detail that is nearly impossible on granite, and the artisans used every inch of it.
The entire surface of this massive structure is just covered in these vibrant, continuous bas-relief carvings. It's like a documentary film carved into stone.
It serves as a phenomenal permanent record of daily life, military might, and celebration in the empire.
What kind of things did they carve?
Well, as you walk around the base, you see continuous processions of highly decorated horses, war elephants, and camels. There are dynamic hunting scenes showing archers in the forests. There are ranks of foreign-looking warriors, perhaps representing mercenaries or defeated foes.
That's amazing.
And there are extensive carvings of dancing girls and musicians. There is even a specific sculpture representing the Holy Festival, clearly showing people using mechanical squirts to spray colored water on each other.
That is so specific and lively.
It gives us a vibrant window into the pageantry, the multiculturalism, and the sheer vitality of the imperial culture.
But standing there, admiring these incredible carvings, brings us to a really eerie architectural quirk about Hampi. A reality that visitors often struggle to wrap their heads around.
Yes, the missing half of the city.
These beautiful stone ruins we see today, these massive platforms, the aqueducts, the carved walls, they are just the basements.
This is perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of the site. When you visit Hampi, you are really just looking at the skeleton of a city.
The historical texts make it clear that the actual palaces, the grand halls, and the towering superstructures built on top of these massive stone basements were constructed out of wood, brick, and plaster.
They were incredibly elaborate.
They featured elaborately carved wooden pillars supporting multiple upper stories. The roofs were likely covered with thin copper sheets or even gilded metal plates to protect the intricate woodwork from the monsoon rains.
They would have been blinding in the sun.
My favorite way to describe it is that walking through Hampi is like looking at the motherboard of a modern computer, but the entire external casing, the screen, the keyboard, all of it is completely gone. What exactly happened to all that wood and metal?
Well, it is the result of a combination of the perishable nature of the materials themselves and a very violent, deliberate historical event.
Right.
Wood, even when protected by copper or paint, eventually succumbs to the elements over 5 centuries. But the destruction here was much more immediate. During the archaeological excavations, when workers finally cleared away the centuries of debris and thorny bushes from these stone basements, they found a very specific, telling layer of stratigraphy.
What did they find?
They found the remains of melted brick and plaster mixed deeply with a massive quantity of wood ash.
A burn layer.
Yes. The superstructures didn't just rot away. They were intentionally, systematically burned to the ground. They collapsed in an inferno onto their own basements.
Wow.
The magnificent wooden palaces with their brilliantly painted carvings, their luxurious fabrics, and their gilded metalwork were entirely consumed by fire when the city was eventually sacked.
We will delve deeply into the mechanics of that sudden destruction shortly, but the fire basically left only the fireproof materials behind, the stone skeletons.
That's right.
That is incredibly haunting. You walk around these beautifully carved granite blocks, and you have to use your imagination to mentally build a towering, multi-story wooden palace on top of them, shining with copper and gold reflecting the Deccan sun. It completely changes how you perceive the space.
It absolutely does. And this heavy reliance on wood construction actually fundamentally influenced how they treated the stone itself, which is a fascinating architectural phenomenon.
Oh, this is the skeuomorphism part.
Exactly. You can see this translated perfectly at our next major site within the Royal Center, the Hazararama Temple.
Because the massive outer enclosure walls are completely covered with horizontal rows of bas-reliefs. But instead of military processions and hunting scenes, these carvings depict the main incidents in the Ramayana, along with a few key scenes from the Mahabharata.
It is a literal picture in stone.
I imagine this was incredibly important for the populace or the court attendees who couldn't necessarily read the Sanskrit texts themselves.
It functions as a visual Bible. It surrounds the royal family with the narrative of divine kingship. But while the carvings are beautiful, the architectural quirks of this temple are what make it truly unique to a design historian.
Let's talk about the pillars inside.
Right, if you step inside the central hall, the roof is supported by 4 incredibly striking, highly polished black stone pillars. They are richly carved, very distinct from the surrounding granite, and they're crowned with bracket capitals that have a remarkably Indo-Corinthian appearance.
Indo-Corinthian. Let's unpack that term. Because when most people hear Corinthian, they think of ancient Greece or Rome. They think of those tall, fluted columns with the very ornate, leafy, almost floral carvings at the very top. What is a Mediterranean architectural motif doing deep in a 16th century southern Indian temple?
It speaks to the deep, long-standing currents of global trade and cultural exchange.
How far back does that go?
Centuries. Those Greek and Roman architectural motifs traveled along the ancient trade routes centuries earlier, influencing the Buddhist art of Gandhara in the north. And those aesthetic echoes slowly trickled down through generations of Indian stonemasons, eventually being adapted and integrated into the Dravidian architectural styles of the south.
So they weren't just in a vacuum.
Not at all. It shows that Vijayanagara was not an isolated bubble. It was the inheritor of vast cross-cultural artistic traditions.
That is fascinating. But there is another architectural detail on the exterior of this temple that deeply confused me when I was reading the sources.
The dripstones.
Yes. Longhurst explicitly criticizes the treatment of the dripstones. So, the heavy eaves projecting over the edge of the roof, designed to throw rainwater clear of the walls. He calls them a faulty piece of building construction.
He's not wrong from an engineering standpoint.
He notes that the builders had to add a massive heavy brick parapet wall directly on top of these stone eaves just to weigh them down, acting as a counterweight to prevent them from slipping completely out of position and crashing to the ground.
Right.
Now, wait a minute. We just discussed how these same engineers carved elevated water channels through solid granite and built towering palaces. If these were master builders, why on earth would they design faulty stone roofs that couldn't mechanically support their own weight?
This specific detail is where the ruins get incredibly fascinating from a psychological and design history perspective. The short answer to your question lies in a concept called skeuomorphism.
Skeuomorphism. Okay, how does that work in this context?
Skeuomorphism occurs when a design object retains ornamental or structural cues from an older iteration, even when those cues are no longer necessary or functional in the new material.
Do we have a modern equivalent of that?
A classic modern example is the save icon on your computer, still looking like a plastic floppy disk, even though floppy disks have been obsolete for decades. We keep the design because it's familiar.
Oh, that makes total sense.
The builders of the Hazararama temple were attempting to reproduce, in solid stone, an architectural form, which they were perfectly familiar with and had mastered in wood.
Ah, they were literally copying wooden architecture directly into stone.
Exactly. The masons were deeply accustomed to building grand structures with timber. In a wooden building, constructing a curved, bracketed cornice covered with thin, overlapping corrugated metal plates makes perfect structural sense.
Because wood is light.
Right. Wood is light, it flexes, it can be bent, and intricate joinery locks it together securely. But that specific, elegant, curved design does not translate successfully to construction in incredibly heavy, inflexible granite.
That is wild to think about. The master stonemason looked at his model, a beautiful, sweeping, lightweight wooden cornice, and just decided to carve a giant, impossibly heavy block of stone to look exactly like it.
Pretty much.
He just ignored the completely different physics and engineering constraints of stone, resulting in a roof that desperately wanted to slip off the building.
Yes. The human desire for familiar aesthetics overpower the cold logic of engineering. The text even notes that some of the stone carving on the base moldings of this same building was clearly copied directly from metalwork.
How so?
They carved designs into the stone representing a row of interlocked metal bracelets,
Yeah.
exactly like the jewelry worn by the dancing girls. They were actively translating the visual language of lightweight wood and malleable metal directly into hard granite, regardless of how inefficient or structurally precarious it made the final building.
That is such an enduring, relatable human quirk. We get so incredibly used to how something is supposed to look that we force new technology or new building materials to awkwardly mimic the old ones.
It's very human.
But the Hazararama Temple isn't just a testament to architectural psychology. It also reveals something really profound about the spiritual landscape of Hampi.
It serves as a physical record of the immense religious diversity and the state-sponsored tolerance of the empire.
Which feels totally contradictory at first glance. Because all the political history we've discussed paints Vijayanagara as this desperate, hyper-militarized bulwark of Hindu dominion fighting against Islamic invasion.
It was a very militant state in many ways.
Right. You would naturally expect an empire forged in that kind of existential holy war to enforce a very rigid Orthodox state religion to unify the people.
But that's not what happened.
No. But the Hazar Rama temple, which is explicitly dedicated to Rama, an incarnation of the god Vishnu, has several Saivite figures, so figures and symbols related to the god Siva, prominently carved right onto its pillars.
Right.
The source text explicitly notes that this blending of sex within a royal temple shows a great absence of bigotry.
And this theological tolerance wasn't a sudden one-off anomaly introduced by Krishna-devaraya. It was baked into the empire's DNA.
It went all the way back.
Yes. If we look back to the early days of the empire, long before the Golden Era, we find ancient Jain temples situated prominently on Hemakutam Hill, right near the main Virupaksha temple. The archaeological record proves that the Jains were in continuous occupation of this specific site long before the Hindu founders of Vijayanagara ever arrived.
And rather than wiping out the Jains or confiscating their sacred hills to build their own fortresses, the early rulers protected them.
They actively intervened to keep the peace.
Yeah. Bukharaya, one of the founding brothers, actually issued a remarkable royal edict in the year 1368. The texts say he had to intervene to bring about a reconciliation between the Jains and the Vaishnavas, who had begun persecuting each other over religious differences.
It's a tense situation.
But the king literally ordained in a public decree that they should each pursue their own religious practices with equal freedom.
To have a powerful monarch issue a state-mandated decree guaranteeing equal religious freedom for minority faiths in the year 1368 is incredibly progressive, especially in the context of medieval geopolitics.
It's way ahead of its time.
It demonstrates that the Jains were an economically and culturally influential community, but more importantly, it shows that the Vijayanagara rulers were intensely pragmatic. They understood that internal social harmony and economic stability were vastly more valuable to the survival of the empire than enforcing strict ideological purity.
And this tolerance extended far beyond just the major organized religions of Hinduism and Jainism. The texts go into fascinating detail about the pervasive folk religion of the area, which the state also allowed to flourish alongside the massive temples.
You're talking about the tree and serpent worship.
Specifically, yes.
Yes, the widespread worship of the Naga, or divine serpent, which was often deeply connected with the worship of sacred trees. If you go to the northeast corner of what is known as the underground temple in Hampi, you will find a great number of Naga cults.
And those are the snake stones, right?
Exactly. These are specially carved snake stones, depicting cobras with one or multiple hoods.
The sources describe the rituals surrounding these stones, which were deeply tied to fertility and earth-based animism. Women, particularly childless wives seeking offspring, would go through elaborate rituals to set up these snake stones.
It was a very involved process.
They would undertake severe fasts, and they would pour offerings of milk over the carved stones, or even directly over massive anthills in the surrounding jungle, because those anthills were believed to be the entrances to the underworld where the live cobras resided.
And then there's this incredible elaborate ceremony of literally marrying trees.
That is so interesting. Tell us about that.
That is a deeply symbolic ritual. A devotee would set up a new snake stone at the base of a sacred pipal tree or a margosa tree. But the ritual required that this tree be symbolically married to another tree of a different species, often planted together on a raised stone platform.
Wait, they held a wedding for the trees?
Yes. The ceremony would be conducted with all the pomp and circumstance of a human wedding, officiated by Brahmin priests.
Wow.
It brilliantly illustrates how deeply intertwined the highly structured formal state religion officiated by the Brahmins was with these ancient, localized, earth-based animistic practices. The women of the royal family themselves were evidently major practitioners of Naga worship, judging by the sheer number and the high quality of these stones and shrines located near the royal quarters.
So if you are walking through the streets of Vijayanagara at its height, you have formal Vaishnavism, you have Saivism, you have thriving Jain communities, and you have ancient ritualistic serpent worship all coexisting within the same walls.
It was a real melting pot.
But the most visually striking, undeniable example of this cultural melting pot is found in the Indo-Saracenic architecture. Let's talk about the Lotus Mahal.
The Lotus Mahal is arguably the most elegant surviving secular building in Hampi. It is located inside the Zanana enclosure, which was the highly secluded, walled-off area reserved for the royal women.
It looks so different from the temples.
It is a beautiful, airy little pavilion with an upper story, designed for the queens to relax in the shade. And Architecturally, it represents a complete seamless blending of traditional Hindu forms with Islamic or Saracenic styles.
The source describes the Lotus Mahal as having a traditionally Hindu stepped base, a Hindu-style tiered roof, and standard Hindu cornices. But all of that is violently mixed with very distinct Islamic arches, multi-lobed archways, and intricate Islamic stucco work decorating the interior.
And it wasn't just this one pavilion either.
Right. The elephant stables, the massive watchtowers guarding the royal enclosures, a queen's bath, they all prominently feature this hybrid style. The elephant stables, for instance, are these massive blocky structures topped with a row of gigantic domes that look completely Islamic in their design.
Which raises an incredibly fascinating paradox about how this empire operated.
Exactly. This is what blows my mind. The entire origin story of this empire, the reason they were living in a boulder field in the first place, is to build a literal fortress wall.
To keep the invaders out.
Right. They are fighting constant, brutal, existential wars for over 2 centuries to keep the Islamic sultanates from conquering the south. But inside the very heart of their own city, in the most private, secure royal enclosures, they are freely, happily adopting the architecture, the artistic styles, and the design languages of the very cultures they are slaughtering on the battlefield.
It speaks volumes about the sophisticated mindset of the Vijayanagara rulers. They were a deeply cosmopolitan, pragmatic people. They did not rigidly equate architectural aesthetics with religious dogma or political enmity.
They just looked at what worked.
They looked at building techniques objectively. If the Saracenic style of using vaulted arches and massive masonry domes offered better structural and engineering solutions for certain types of buildings, like the immense column-free interior spaces needed to house dozens of royal war elephants, they simply used it.
They didn't view an arch as inherently Islamic and therefore evil. They viewed it as a superior way to hold up a roof.
Precisely. They valued aesthetics, functional engineering, and luxurious comfort above arbitrary ideological boundaries. They were secure enough in their own cultural identity and military might to borrow the absolute best ideas from their rivals without feeling threatened.
It paints a picture of a really vibrant, forward-thinking, incredibly wealthy utopia. You have this perfectly engineered city, a deeply tolerant theology, world-class hybrid architecture, and wealth flowing in from global trade. It seems invincible.
Which makes its sudden, absolute, and violent destruction all the more shocking and tragic.
Yeah. The narrative takes a very dark, very abrupt turn here. After centuries of expanding dominance and unparalleled prosperity, the entire imperial structure comes crashing down incredibly fast. We are looking at the year 1565.
The Battle of Talakota.
Right. What happened to shift the balance so drastically?
The geopolitical landscape of the Deccan had shifted dramatically. The various Islamic sultanates to the north, places like Bijapur, Golconda, Ahmadgar, and Bidar, had historically been divided. They fought each other just as fiercely as they fought Vijayanagara.
So they were never a unified threat until now.
Correct. But by 1565, they realized that individually, they could never defeat the southern giant. So they put aside their centuries of bitter rivalries and formed a massive, unprecedented, unified military alliance. They combined their massive forces and marched south together against Vijayanagara.
The timing was disastrous for the empire. At this point, the empire was nominally ruled by King Siddhasiva, but he was essentially a figurehead.
The real power was elsewhere.
Exactly. The real, absolute power was held by his minister, a man named Ramaraja. And based on the historical accounts, Ramaraja seems to have miscalculated the geopolitical reality wildly. He had a long history of displaying incredible hubris, treating the envoys of the sultanates with extreme haughtiness, and constantly playing the sultans against each other to maintain his own power.
He was playing a very dangerous game.
Very dangerous diplomatic game, and his arrogance finally caused it to blow up in his face.
The massive armies met at a place called Talakota. It was not a prolonged, drawn-out war of attrition. It was a single, decisive, and completely catastrophic defeat for the Vijayanagara forces.
It was over quickly.
Very quickly. The Northern Alliance brought devastating artillery, and their cavalry tactics overwhelmed the Southern Army. During the chaos of the battle, the elderly minister Ramaraja was captured and promptly beheaded.
Oh, wow.
His death sent a shockwave of panic through the Vijayanagara ranks. The army broke and fled. Ramaraja's brother Tirunala survived the battle, but he panicked completely.
And this is the part that is hard to fathom. Tirumala is an experienced military commander. He has this massive, impenetrable capital city just a few days right away. a city with towering granite walls, nestled inside impassable boulder fields stocked with endless supplies.
A city built to withstand a siege.
Exactly. Instead of retreating to the capital to organize a defense and withstand a siege, which the city was explicitly designed to do, he chose to run.
The source text paints a chaotic picture. Tirumala hastily retreated to Vijayanagara, gathered the puppet king Sadasiva, a few loyal followers, and the women of the royal household. And then he organized a convoy.
To save the wealth.
He loaded 550 elephants with the absolute cream of the imperial treasury.
We are talking unimaginable wealth. Gold bullion, sacks of diamonds, precious stones valued by contemporaries at more than 100 million sterling in 16th century money. They packed up the state insignia, the jeweled royal throne, and they just fled south.
They just left everything else behind.
They completely abandoned the city and its massive population to their fate.
They stripped the city of its leadership, its military command structure, and its wealth in a matter of hours. The civilian population, hundreds of thousands of people left completely leaderless and terrified, made absolutely no organized effort to defend the walls.
It must have been pandemonium.
It was. The very next day, as the news of the defeat spread, the city was immediately descended upon and looted by hordes of local wandering tribes and opportunistic bandits. The chaos was absolute. And then on the third day, the victorious unified armies of the sultanates arrived at the gates.
The historical description of what happened next is just horrific. We are reading the account synthesized by historian Robert Sewell, which Longhurst quotes extensively. Sewell writes that for 5 entire months, the victorious armies occupied the city.
They didn't just loot it and leave.
They stayed with fire and sword, with heavy crowbars and axes, carrying on a methodical daily work of absolute destruction.
It was a systematic erasure of a civilization. They had already taken whatever wealth the fleeing royals had left behind. The 5 months of occupation were dedicated purely to dismantling the infrastructure and erasing the culture.
Breaking everything they couldn't take.
They smashed the intricate stone statues in the temples, they purposefully broke the dams and the irrigation channels that kept the city alive, and crucially, they set fire to every single thing they could possibly burn.
Yeah. And this violently connects back to what we discussed earlier, the fact that the magnificent superstructures of the palaces and halls were made of wood. The invaders set fire to every royal building they could find.
The burn layer.
Right. The towering wooden pavilions, the intricately painted carvings, the copper roofs, all of it collapsed in a massive inferno, raining ash down onto those stone basements. Sewell captures the sheer scale of the tragedy perfectly. He writes, "Never perhaps in the history of the world has such havoc been wrought, and wrought so suddenly on so splendid a city."
To transition from a teeming, incredibly wealthy, industrially advanced metropolis on a Tuesday to a ruined, pillaged landscape of massacre and fire by Friday. Well, it is almost impossible for the modern mind to comprehend the sheer speed and scale of the trauma.
Just wiped off the map.
The city was decapitated, its lifeblood drained, and its body burned.
There is a really eerie, devastating postscript to this entire story. Just 2 years after the Battle of Talicota and the subsequent sacking, an Italian traveler named Cesare Federici visited the site of the capital.
He documented what he saw.
He did. He wrote that the houses and the stone structures still stood, but they were completely empty, and there was dwelling in them nothing but tingreys and other wild beasts.
From a booming population of 500,000 humans to a literal tiger sanctuary in just 24 months. The empire itself fractured into smaller, weaker states, moving their capitals further south. But the great city of Vijayanagara was never repopulated.
Never rebuilt.
It was never rebuilt. It was simply blotted out of the political landscape.
It really makes you pause and reflect. It is chilling to think that a city as vibrant, as wealthy, and as permanent seeming as our modern capitals, places we consider invincible like New York, London, or Tokyo, could theoretically be reduced to an empty, overgrown ghost town in a matter of days due to a single geopolitical miscalculation.
It's terrifying, really.
We build these massive, towering structures of glass and steel, and we think we have somehow conquered time, but history shows us continuously just how fragile human permanence really is.
It is the ultimate historical lesson in impermanence. The hubris of Ramaraja brought a 200-year-old empire to its knees in an afternoon.
Yeah.
But, looking closely at Hampi, there's another, more resilient side to that coin. The empire was definitively destroyed. The beautiful wooden palaces burned to ash, the immense wealth was scattered across the continent, and the people were displaced or killed.
Yeah.
But the bedrock survived.
The stone
The
basements.
massive granite basements, the incredibly engineered stone aqueducts, the intricate bas-reliefs telling the eternal stories of the Ramayana and the joyous Dasara festival, those endured the crowbars and the fire. The destruction successfully erased the fragile casing, but the core data, the stories and the ambitions carved into the very skeleton of the city outlasted the violence.
The rocks remember.
They do. They are an archive that fire couldn't burn.
Well, let's take a breath and briefly recap this incredible journey we've been on today. We started in a rocky, seemingly impossible landscape that was deeply tied to the ancient mythology of the Monkey Kingdom. We watched as a sudden, terrifying political power vacuum in the 14th century led to the desperate founding of a fortress empire by two princes and a visionary spiritual sage.
We saw that empire slowly consolidate power and eventually reach its magnificent zenith under the athlete king, Krishna-deva-Raya.
We explored how his administration transformed this barren, burning rock into a lush, heavily watered metropolis by utilizing ancient stone-cutting techniques and importing Portuguese engineering to build massive stone aqueducts.
It was an engineering marvel.
We walked through the opulent royal citadel, marveling at the endless carvings of the Dasara Diba and trying to visualize the missing wooden palaces that once stood on those platforms.
And we explored the deep, pragmatic religious tolerance of the empire.
Right, where ancient Jain temples, formal Hindu state religion, and localized serpent worshippers all coexisted peacefully. We saw how the rulers proudly utilized the Islamic architecture of their enemies to beautify their own royal enclosures.
And finally, we witnessed the tragic, incredibly sudden collapse of all that brilliance due to diplomatic hubris and overwhelming military force, leaving behind the haunting, beautiful stone ruins we see baking in the sun today.
It is a stunning, sobering story. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a thought to mull over, building on something really specific we unpacked today. Think back to the Hazararama Temple. Think about the concept of skeuomorphism we discussed.
Ah, the faulty dripstones.
Yes, the heavy stone carved to look like lightweight wood. The master builders of Hampi were so deeply used to working in timber that they mindlessly copied curved wooden designs directly into heavy granite, even though it completely defied the physics of the stone and required them to build extra ugly brick walls just to keep the roof from collapsing on their heads.
They couldn't let go of the past.
They were brilliant engineers, but they were trapped by the familiar design language of the past. So I want you to look around your own world today. Look at the modern tools you use every day, the digital apps on your phone, or even the massive social structures, the educational systems, and the corporate ladders we blindly rely on.
That's a great point.
How many of the things we are building or maintaining today are really just heavy stone copies of outdated wooden ideas from the past?
That is an excellent, slightly uncomfortable question to ask ourselves.
Are we forcing new technology to awkwardly mimic old, inefficient habits just because it feels familiar? What are the faulty dripstones of the 21st century? Think about it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. I highly, highly encourage you to go look up high-resolution photos of the Hampi ruins to see these massive boulders and intricate carvings for yourself. Until next time, keep questioning the structures around you.